Sopra il foglio delle galere.
Meno male che non è vivo.
On the artist, on the singer, on the author, on the actress, everything to do.
Yeah.
But the question is, who was Maria Callas?
Maria Callas died in Paris on September 16, 1977, aged 53. Her life had had all the dimensions of one of her own operatic roles.
Maria told me that her father went to an astrologer to ask them for the best time to make love so that a boy would be born. Then he went to America.
The incredible coverage we have received from the media in the last week. On behalf
buongiorno signore e signori, mi chiamo Alain Serron, sono il responsabile della Evening Classics in Francia, un paese dove il nome di Maria Callas è sempre estremamente vivo e sentito anche in considerazione della straordinario coverage ricevuto dai media nel corso delle ultime settimane.
On behalf of EMI Classics, I would like to thank you all to be here today to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the death of Maria Callas.
E a nome della EMI Classics desidero ringraziare tutti loro per essere qua presenti oggi a commemorare il 20° anniversario della morte di Maria Callas.
Scusate, ma io pregherei i signori delle ultime file di venire avanti, perché usiamo un spettacolo un po' povero.
Ragione. Noi stiamo qua.
Callas recording in our Abbey Road Studios in London.
Ed infine il signor Paul Bailey, che è responsabile per la rimasterizzazione di tutte le registrazioni che abbiamo svolto nelle nostre sale di incisione ad Abbey Road a Londra.
I would like also to welcome in this very distinguished audience Maria Callas' sister, Mrs. Jackie Calogero-Poulos, and her husband, Andreas Statopoulos, who came especially from Athens for this evening.
A questo punto consentitemi desidererei presentarvi le edizioni della Callas che sono appena state presentate.
And 11 recitals, which makes an average number of 2 opera.
Come ben sapete, la Callas smise di recitare le opere in teatro nel 1965 e dal 1953 al 1955 faccio riferimento a una trasmissione televisiva che ci è stata mostrata e in cui si presentava la seconda parte della Tosca rappresentata a Londra all'inizio degli anni 60. E devo dire che è stata un'esperienza un po' frustrante, in quanto mi chiedo come mai sia stata rappresentata solamente la seconda parte e non la versione completa.
Visto che siamo qui a parlare soprattutto del merchandising
dell'immagine in termini tecnici. Devo dire che Maria ha avuto molta sfortuna in tanti campi, ma soprattutto in quello delle sue incisioni, perché le primissime incisioni, quelle dei primi anni 50, a Speak Italian, quelle quando la sua voce esplose esplodendo tutto il mondo, e fece di colpo tutta una serie di grandi capolavori della lirica, grandi interpretazioni, con grandi direttori, grandi cantanti, di Sabata, per esempio, l'Oscar di Sabata, Pippo, per esempio, di Coppi, ma era un momento in cui ancora la tecnica della registrazione delle incisioni non era stata perfezionata, le incisioni che aveva fatto precedentemente, e aggiunse una serie di memorabili interpretazioni, per cui la Carmen, che dobbiamo, devo dire, quasi interamente a Michel Glotz, perché lei era molto contraria a interpretare Carmen, soprattutto in scena, poi invece ci ha regalato una delle interpretazioni di quel ruolo forse definitive, dove una delle due muse aiuta l'altra. Il recitare incentiva il canto e il canto ti fa recitare meglio. Di questo Maria è stata la promo dei privilegiati, perché abbiamo visto Maria recitare e cantare. E purtroppo per uno screzio di pochi anni, 5, 6, 10 anni, lei non ha potuto consegnare al futuro quello che significava Maria Callas come attrice e cantante drammatica. Per uno scherzo malevolo del destino. Forse il destino ha voluto che rimanesse come voce sublime, astratta probabilmente, e infatti ci piace forse di più adesso sentirla che non vederla in certi concerti dove è illuminata male, dove è pettinata in un certo modo, dove l'incantesimo della sua presenza in scena nel personaggio ha una piccola vendetta del destino che non le ha permesso di avere a disposizione i mezzi che hanno tutti i cantanti adesso. L'abbiamo cominciato proprio qui alla Scala nel 1976 con l'inaugurazione dell'hotel con Classico Domingo, Clive che dirigeva, a fare la prima vera grande ripresa live di una inaugurazione alla Scala. 76, neanche 20 anni fa. Maria è morta poi proprio quell'anno, l'anno dopo, cioè proprio ci voleva poco perché la tecnica ci dovevano svegliare prima, quindi hanno inventato il video system finché Maria era ancora in condizione di affrontare il pubblico. Peccato, comunque consoliamoci comunque, perché finché ci sarà musica e canto, la voce di Maria Callas resterà come un patrimonio insuperabile che rallegrerà e conforterà gli uomini e le donne di tutto il mondo, di tutte le età, di tutte le razze, per l'eternità. Io non esito a mettere il nome di Maria Callas nella lirica, alla stessa strega di Beethoven, nella musica, di Michelangelo, nella pittura. Sono quei momenti celestiali in cui lo spirito si unisce alla materia, il divino al terreno. Sono quei momenti che ci confortano della miseria della nostra vita quotidiana fatta di tante cose grigie, insignificanti, che ci disturbano, che ci avviliscono, che ci impoveriscono. Quando si ha la fortuna di assistere allo spettacolo del genio, ti conforti e dici valeva la pena vivere questa vita sulla terra.
I'd like to ask a question of Maria Di Stefano, who was Maria Callas' oldest partner from the beginning to the
recital you did with the piano in 73 and 74. You can tell us more about what was it, her hopes at that moment. She wanted to come back on stage for a complete opera with orchestra.
Forse ci può raccontare un po' qual era lo spirito di Maria Callas in occasione di questo ultimo recital che si è svolto tra il 73 e il 74, quali erano le sue speranze, quali erano i suoi rapporti con tutto il mondo che la circondava.
Ci puoi raccontare?
Come nessuno sono nato per ascoltare.
Come lavorava Maria, comunicazione di questo era molto. Il rapporto di affetto.
Volte nel 52, quindi 51, 52 a Messico, 62 in un concerto a Londra, la Golden Hour alla Covent Garden, e poi nel 72 a New York. Ogni 10 anni. L'ultimo momento, nel 72 è nata, è rifiorita questa vecchia amicizia che era sempre esistita, perché insomma, avevamo molte. Nel 72 viene l'Erba, il sovrintendente di Torino, e propone alla Maria di fare questa regia. Non so per quale ragione, ma non accetteranno mai. Invece lei ha insistito, si è fatta questa regia, perché poi in verità il regista era Fabrizio Melano del Metropolitan, non era stata inventata, era stata preparata molto bene, però tutto quel mondo della cultura italiana, leggiata da Grassi, contro questa coppia che deve fare la regia. Nessun direttore d'orchestra voleva dirigere, comunque si è fatta questa regia col successo, con l'insuccesso che è stata anche una rarità, perché i registi che hanno fatto il fiasco, il vero fiasco io non ho mai capito. Io ho cantato è interessante, perché non lo posso saltare. It's very interesting what they say.
Allora, well, later on in London in 62 in the Covent Garden for the Golden Hour, and then later on in 1972 in New York. And in 72 practically I would say that this marks the year in which an old friendship was reflourishing. And I mean, it was not just the voice which was linking us together, because we basically shared the same view of the world, of the life. And so, basically in 72 we renewed this old friendship, but we never did any plans, as one might have thought of. And in 72, Erba, the responsible of the Turin theatre, proposed Maria Callas for the stage direction, and she replied, yes, I'm going to do it, I'm ready to do it, but with the cooperation of Giuseppe Di Stefano. And I replied, no, they will never accept such a proposal, but she insisted, and in the end we did it. And by the way, everything was already prepared by the stage director, Mr. Fabrizio Melano, who was responsible for the Metropolitan. And anyhow, in those days, the whole Italian cultural world, headed by Mr. Grassi, was basically against the idea of her and me acting as directors, but in spite of that, it was quite successful.
Microfono. butta giù?
Nasce scherzando, perché io ero tornato l'anno precedente dalla Corea con una richiesta dove cantavo già da 3-4 anni, i concerti da solo, e ero tornato con una proposta per ritornare a Seul con un grande soprano. Ci fu un cambiere, se lei riesce a avere questo soprano avrà 10, quest'altro avrà 6 e quest'altro avrà 4. Fu un cambiere questa proposta. Io, tornando, ho parlato con 2 celebri soprani, ma questi non se la sentivano in Corea, e quando è stato il momento di pensare a Maria, io dico, ma Maria non canta più. Sto parlando della fine del 71, the end of 71. E così nasce questa idea. Quando incontro per caso, when I see again Maria in 72, 6 months later in New York, I asked him, are you still singing? No, I'm not singing. But what, I have an offer for you from Korea. And it's funny, but these are the things of life, you understand? I'm not building up anything. He said, but why don't you come to Korea and start singing? Oh, I'm afraid I cannot sing anymore. No. Okay. And I was making fun, trying to, she was feeling low, down, era molto depressa. Io con questo difettaccio di accendermi, ho contatto delle persone, when I stay with people, I love to talk, I love to become friend, I'm very friendly, that's my nature. Mia natura è piuttosto portata allo scherzo, all'ironia, a vedere le cose sempre in una luce molto profonda, cose che nascondo, però a una persona come Maria che in quel momento era così depressa, ma andiamo in Corea a cantare, ma era tutto uno scherzo. E lei fa, ma no, io non ho più voce, io sono arrivato a dire perfino una cattiveria, dico, sai che in quei paesi orientali loro hanno un modo di cantare dove la voce ondula. Volevo farla sorridere, ho fatto, ho aperto la mia natura, ma non è che lì sia si è divertito un po', e ci siamo rivisti spessissimo. And we see each other after this overture.
Quite jokingly, that is to say, I used to travel to Korea to participate to recitals, and I was asked to have the involvement to bring back a soprano. I got in touch with 2 sopranos, but they refused to do it. And then I thought of Maria Callas. It was at the end of 1971, and she had stopped singing. And so I approached her and made her the proposal to come to Korea and sing with me. She was very much depressed, whilst as far as I'm concerned, my nature is the nature of a very enthusiastic person, and so I tried to involve her as much as possible, and she replied, I have no more voice. And so my answer, quite jokingly, was, well, you know, in these countries, people are accustomed to these undulating voices, and so basically Maria accepted my invitation. Una domanda a Michel Glotz, che negli anni 60 ha lavorato intensamente con Maria Callas a Parigi. Come lavorava Maria Callas e qual era il suo approccio musicale?
I think that after what Mr. Giuseppe has said, it's almost impossible to speak of Maria Callas, but I will try to give some insight about the way she was handling the work and seeing at the work and being so humble to the composers.
Penso che dopo le parole che sono state presentate dal signor Zuffi abbastanza impossibile parlare e descrivere meglio Maria Callas, tuttavia cercherò di darvi un'idea su come lei lavorava e cantava e come era umile nell'approcciare e nell'avvicinare i vari compositori.
And I'd like to give an example of the way she was behaving in the studio. I'd like to give an example of the way she was behaving with her colleagues, and most particularly with the producer and conductor when she was doing a new production on stage, and most particularly to my neighbor on the right, whom she respected and loved with the utmost admiration and affection. And then I will give an example of her way of working with a great conductor like Herbert von Karajan, because I was close to both of them, and I will be able to give you 3 little insights in order not to get too long and eventually boring.
Voglio, soprattutto quando era sul palcoscenico, e devo dire che aveva un rapporto veramente di grande amore e di rispetto nei confronti della persona che è seduta a questo tavolo alla mia destra. Poi voglio anche dirvi...
In the studio, she was the most disciplined artist I ever saw in 40 years of producing records with all the singers of the world, except, unfortunately, Mr. Di Stefano. But with this notable exception, I've recorded practically every single singer which you know of name, and I have never, ever been so impressed by the humility, the discipline, the fact that she was always ahead of time for everybody. She was rehearsing with the orchestra. She was always ready for the recording engineers to give the number of examples we needed, some fortissimi and some pianissimi and some mezzo forte. There was not one thing she would refuse in order to achieve perfection. There was not one kindness she didn't have for the technician. And I will give you only an example, and then I will leave the translator to tell you these parts of the story. That when we recorded, this is an example, when we recorded Aperti, the aria of Beethoven, an incident happened in the studio when we had left the studio and finished the work. And unfortunately, by a wrong maneuver, the tape was erased completely from beginning to end. So, of course, they called me completely, totally panicked. And I had to go to Maria and tell her, unfortunately, I have bad news for you. The aperfero, which you recorded this afternoon, is destroyed. It's exactly as if you had done anything. And she looked at me, bursting laughing, and she said, "Ah, ancora meglio, we'll be able to do it better." That's an example.
L'ho fatto, al che lei mi guardò, rise di cuore e disse: "Tanto meglio, così potrò fare una cosa migliore."
So that's the first example, but there are many, of course, I could give. The second example, which I would like to mention, is her relationship with the producer. I mean, everything known about her relationship with Visconti, everything is known of her relationship with Zeffirelli, who was for her the new Visconti. And I mean, Franco was for her a sort of a god. And I remember that when she was making the production of Tosca with him in 1964 at Covent Garden, she was already pressing him because they were to do Norma in Paris in 1965. And Franco is sometimes a little slow. When he's concentrated on Tosca, he doesn't want to be disturbed and think of Norma. He's thinking deeply of Norma, but he doesn't want to talk too much about it. And she was already excited by this Norma, and she wanted to press him. And there was not 1 minute in the day she didn't want to see him, she didn't want to have his impression, she didn't want to have his advice, and it was so much of an osmosis that she would have worked gladly 16 hours a day, And in fact, at Covent Garden, the dress rehearsal was in the morning at that time, and still more in the morning. And I mean, she couldn't do one thing without having a look to Franco to see if he was in agreement with what she was doing. And really, this genius of the stage, because she was a genius of the stage, needed all the time to be reassured and to be also surrounded by geniuses. That was what made this wonderful collaboration between her and Franco.
Ora.
The relationship with Karajan was also something quite amazing. As you probably know, she did the new production of Lucia with Karajan, conducting and directing at La Scala. And then this production after La Scala went to Berlin and eventually to Vienna. We do have, through the radio and thanks to EMI, the witness of this wonderful performance of Lucia on record. But what is not on the record is the fact that after, I don't know, 8 performances and 1.5 months of rehearsal at La Scala, where she was working like a horse with Karajan, during the whole tour, I saw, and Karajan was telling me, but I mean, I saw it myself. I mean, everywhere, every time she was singing, she was saying, Helen, can we rehearse this little bit? I am not satisfied. I'm sure that we can do better. And he was saying, look, Maria, we have done 6 weeks of rehearsal at La Scala. We have done 8 performances at La Scala. And we are traveling now and rehearsing again in Berlin, in Vienna. We are not going to rehearse in the train or in the plane or whatever. Yes, yes, please give me 10 minutes or 15 minutes in the studio because I'm sure we can do this much better. These phrases will be much better. If you give me the time, please give me the time. And this is something which Karajan never forgot. And when, after a lapse of time in their friendship, I made the reconciliation in Paris in 62 or 3 in a restaurant. I mean, there was so much emotion, and Karajan always told me that he has never, ever in his life met somebody so professional and so humble. Make very clear, which seems to have been gravely misunderstood throughout the years by so many people, and most particularly by the critics. Sometimes there is in Maria Callas' recordings a note which is more or less beautiful. Sometimes even at the limit of being ugly. And of course, everybody has said, well, you know, she's already finished. Well, I would like to explain that she was perfectly able to produce a very, very beautiful sound. And I am the living witness, because we have so many examples of such and such note, which is very exposed, and which we have on 3, 4, 5 samples. But when she was listening in the booth of the studio to the 3, 4, or 5 notes which we had, if she had the choice of a very beautiful note, of a very expressive note, or a passionate note, depending on the music, she would not hesitate for 1 second to choose the one which was the most expressive or pathetic, even if vocally it was not the best. And so when people are telling me, how could you, producer, you, Michel Gluck's producer, accept such and such note from such a great artist? It is such a grave artistic misunderstanding, which Karajan for himself understood perfectly, because I mean, he was the same type of person. He preferred, for instance, a chord which was not together but really beautiful and really deep in bases, than something which was very perfect but not expressive. So once for all, Callas recorded what she could record, and if she chose such or such take, and it was also my choice, but I wanted to be sure that you would approve my choice. I mean, there should be no misunderstanding that she could do it in a different way, but that was what made the difference between Callas and the others.
Teatro, Maria Callas. Finally, to conclude, I would like to ask Paul Bailey to tell us why the transfers of the new CD edition are better than the transfers of the preceding edition when we released this.
Io cieco, fine, zero. Però se me li non ho parlato della nostra traviata. Fa bene, non dovevo. Fa bene, non parlare. No, loro non hanno detto. La faremo.
Abbiamo cercato di eliminare tutte le opere, quindi ci era un po', per così dire, vetroso.
Sometimes there is in Maria Callas' recordings a note which is more or less beautiful. Sometimes even at the limit of being ugly. And of course, everybody has said, well, you know, she's already finished. Well, I would like to explain that she was perfectly able to produce a very, very beautiful sound. And I am the living witness, because we have so many examples of such and such note, which is very exposed, and which we have on 3, 4, 5 samples. But when she was listening in the booth of the studio to the 3, 4, or 5 notes which we had, if she had the choice of a very beautiful note, of a very expressive note, or a passionate note, depending on the music, she would not hesitate for 1 second to choose the one which was the most expressive or pathetic, even if vocally it was not the best. And so when people are telling me, how could you, producer, you, Michel God's producer, accept such and such note from such a great artist? It is such a grave artistic misunderstanding, which Karajan for himself understood perfectly, because I mean, he was the same type of person. He preferred, for instance, a chord which was not together, but really beautiful and really deep in bases, than something which was very perfect, but not expressive. So once for all, Callas recorded what she could record, and if she chose such or such take, and it was also my choice, but I wanted to be sure that you would approve my choice. I mean, there should be no misunderstanding that she could do it in a different way, but that was what made the difference between Callas and the others.
Teatro, Maria Callas. Finally, to conclude, I would like to ask Paul Bailey to tell us why the transfers of the new CD edition are better than the transfers of the preceding edition when we released this.
Io cieco, fine, zero. Però se me li non ho parlato della nostra traviata. Fa bene, non dovevo. Fa bene, non parlare. No, loro non hanno detto. La faremo.
Abbiamo cercato di eliminare tutte le opere, quindi ci